It was the winter of 1994, and a group of 5 university students from Fairbanks, Alaska, had decided to spend their weekend skiing in the remote wilderness of the Brooks Range. The group consisted of Mark, the de facto leader, Sarah, his girlfriend, Jake, the joker of the group, Emily, the quiet but observant one, and Tom, the outdoorsman who had suggested the trip. They were all experienced skiers, confident in their abilities to handle the harsh Alaskan winter. But none of them were prepared for what awaited them. The day started clear and bright, the sun reflecting off the pristine snow as they set out from their cabin early in the morning. The forecast had predicted mild weather, and the group was in high spirits, laughing and joking as they glided through the frozen landscape. They planned to ski to an old ranger station about 15 miles away, spend the night, and return the next day. It was supposed to be a simple, fun adventure. By midday, the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, and the temperature dropped sharply. Tom, who had grown up in Alaska, was the first to notice the change. "We should turn back," he said, his voice tense. "This storm is coming in faster than I expected." But Mark, ever the optimist, brushed off his concerns. "We've come this far. Let's push on. We'll make it to the station before the worst hits." They didn't. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The storm hit with a fury that none of them had ever experienced. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow fell so thickly that visibility dropped to near zero. The group huddled together, trying to shield themselves from the biting cold. They could no longer see the trail, and the GPS device they had brought was useless in the whiteout. "We need to find shelter," Tom shouted over the wind. "If we stay out here, we'll freeze to death." The others nodded, their faces pale with fear. They stumbled forward, hoping to find some kind of refuge. But the storm had transformed the landscape into an alien world, and they were hopelessly lost. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of abating. The group was exhausted, their energy sapped by the cold and the relentless wind. Just as they were about to give up hope, Emily spotted something in the distance, a dark shape looming through the snow. "Over there!" she cried, pointing. "It looks like a cabin!" They hurried toward the structure, their hearts lifting at the thought of warmth and shelter. But as they drew closer, their relief turned to unease. The cabin was old and dilapidated, its windows broken and its roof sagging under the weight of the snow. It looked as though it hadn't been used in decades. "Better than nothing," Mark said, pushing open the creaking door. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, filled with the smell of rot and decay. The floor was littered with debris, and the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. But there was a fireplace, and a stack of firewood in the corner. "We can start a fire," Sarah said, her voice trembling with cold. "At least we'll be warm." As they worked to get the fire going, the storm outside grew even fiercer. The wind screamed against the walls of the cabin, and the snow piled up against the windows, blocking out what little light remained. The group huddled around the fire, trying to ignore the eerie atmosphere of the cabin. But as the hours passed, they began to notice strange things. First, it was the sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from just outside the door. Then, the scratching, something sharp dragging against the wood, as if trying to get in. "It's just the wind," Jake said, trying to sound confident. But his voice wavered, and no one believed him. Then came the howls. They were unlike any wolf howls the group had ever heard. They were deeper, more resonant, and filled with a kind of malevolent intelligence. The howls seemed to come from all around the cabin, closing in on them. "Wolves," Tom whispered, his face pale. "But they don't sound right." The group sat in silence, listening to the howls grow louder and closer. The fire flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. And then, they heard it. A loud thud against the door, followed by a snarl. Something was trying to get in. Mark grabbed a piece of firewood and stood by the door, his heart pounding. "If they get in, we're dead," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded, their eyes wide with fear. They could hear the wolves, or whatever they were, pacing outside, their growls growing more frenzied. Suddenly, the door shook violently, as if struck by a tremendous force. The group screamed, backing away as the wood splintered. And then, with a final crash, the door gave way. What came through the door was not a wolf. It was something far worse. The creature was massive, its fur matted and black, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Its jaws were lined with razor-sharp teeth, and its claws dug into the wooden floor as it advanced. The group froze, paralyzed by terror. The creature let out a deafening roar, and then it lunged. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos and blood. Mark swung the firewood at the creature, but it was like hitting a brick wall. Sarah screamed as the creature's claws tore into her arm, and Jake tried to pull her away, only to be knocked aside like a rag doll. Emily and Tom scrambled to find something, anything, to defend themselves, but it was no use. The creature was too fast, too strong. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, the storm outside suddenly ceased. The wind died down and the snow stopped falling. The creature paused, its head tilting as if listening to something. And then, with a final snarl, it turned and disappeared into the night. The group was left in shock, their bodies battered and bleeding. They knew they couldn't stay in the cabin, not with that thing out there. But they also knew they couldn't survive another night in the storm. As they debated what to do, Tom noticed something strange. The fire, which had been burning steadily, was now flickering weakly, as if it were running out of fuel. But the stack of firewood was still full. And then, he saw it. The firewood wasn't wood at all. It was bones. The group stared in horror at the pile of human bones stacked neatly in the corner. They realized, with a sinking feeling, that they were not the first to seek shelter in the cabin. And they would not be the last. As they fled into the night, the howls began again. But this time, they were closer. And this time, there were more of them. The group ran, their hearts pounding, their breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast they ran, the howls followed. And then, one by one, they began to fall. Mark was the first to go, dragged down by a shadowy figure that emerged from the darkness. Sarah was next, her screams cut short as she was pulled into the trees. Jake tried to fight, but he was no match for the creatures that surrounded him. Emily and Tom ran until they could run no more, their bodies giving out from exhaustion and fear. As Tom lay in the snow, his vision fading, he saw them, the creatures, emerging from the shadows. They were not wolves. They were something else, something ancient and evil. And as they closed in, he realized the truth. They had never been lost. They had been hunted. And now, the hunt was over. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the sun rose over the pristine snow. The cabin stood silent and empty, its door hanging open, its interior stained with blood. The tracks in the snow told a story of terror and death, but there were no bodies to be found. And in the distance, the howls began again.